Welcome to the Timeless Talents channel. In this video, I'll be showcasing some of the most irresistible Hollywood fathers and their stunning daughters. Enjoy the content, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Jon Voight, 86 years old, and Angelina Jolie, 50 years old. Tom Hanks, 69 years old, and Elizabeth Ann Hanks, 43 years old. Martin Sheen, 85 years old, and Renee Estevez, 58 years old. Al Pacino, 85 years old, and Olivia Pacino, 24 years old. Sean Penn, 65 years old, and Dylan Francis Penn, 34 years old. John Travolta, 71 years old, and Ella Blue Travolta, 25 years old. Michael Douglas, 80 years old, and Karis Zeta Douglas, 22 years old. Tom Selleck, 80 years old, and Hannah Margaret Selleck, 36 years old. Bryan Cranston, 69 years old, and Taylor Dearden, 32 years old. Alec Baldwin, 67 years old, and Ireland Baldwin, 29 years old. Ron Howard, 71 years old, and Bryce Dallas Howard, 44 years old. Phil Collins, 74 years old, and Lily Collins, 36 years old. Kevin Costner, 70 years old, and Liam Costner, 29 years old. Ben Affleck, 53 years old, and Violet Affleck, 19 years old. Paul Walker passed away in 2013, at the age of 40, and Meadow Rain Walker, 26 years old. Adam Sandler, 58 years old, and Sadie Sandler, 19 years old. Eric Roberts, 69 years old, and Emma Roberts, 34 years old. Greg Kinnear, 62 years old, and Lily Catherine Kinnear, 21 years old. Robert De Niro, 82 years old, and Drina De Niro, 57 years old. Andy Serkis, 61 years old, and Ruby Ashbourne Serkis, 27 years old. Michael J. Fox, 64 years old, and Esme Annabelle Fox, 23 years old. Johnny Depp, 62 years old, and Lily Rose Depp, 26 years old. Jude Law, 52 years old, and Iris Law, 24 years old. Billy Ray Cyrus, 63 years old, and Miley Cyrus, 32 years old. Tom Cruise, 63 years old, and Suri Noel, 19 years old. Chris Hemsworth, 42 years old, and India Rose Hemsworth, 13 years old. Andy Garcia, 69 years old, and Daniela Garcia, 37 years old. Forrest Whitaker, 64 years old, and True Whitaker, 27 years old. Kevin Kline, 77 years old, and Greta Kline, 31 years old. John Krasinski, 45 years old, and Hazel Krasinski, 11 years old. Jason Priestley, 55 years old, and Ava Veronica Priestley, 18 years old. Steven Tyler, 77 years old, and Liv Tyler, 48 years old. Stephen Baldwin, 59 years old, and Hailey Bieber, 28 years old. Matt Damon, 54 years old, and Gia Zavala Damon, 16 years old. Christian Bale, 51 years old, and Emmeline Bale, 20 years old. Bill Pullman, 71 years old, and Misa Pullman, 37 years old. David Duchovny, 65 years old, and Wes Duchovny, 26 years old. Idris Elba, 52 years old, and Ihsan Elba, 23 years old. Sylvester Stallone, 79 years old, and Sistine Stallone, 27 years old. Lionel Richie, 76 years old, and Nicole Richie, 43 years old. Jamie Foxx, 57 years old, and Corinne Fox, 31 years old. Mark Wahlberg, 54 years old, and Ella Ray Wahlberg, 21 years old. Keith Urban, 57 years old, and Sunday Rose Kidman Urban, 17 years old. Josh Brolin, 57 years old, and Eden Brolin, 31 years old. James Marsden, 51 years old, and Mary James Marsden, 20 years old. Stanley Tucci, 64 years old, and Camilla Tucci, 23 years old. Paul Rudd, 56 years old, and Darby Rudd, 15 years old. David Arquette, 53 years old, and Coco Arquette, 21 years old. Denzel Washington, 70 years old, and Katia Washington, 37 years old. Don Johnson, 75 years old, and Dakota Johnson, 35 years old. LeBron James, 40 years old, and Juri James, 10 years old. Dwayne Johnson, 53 years old, and Jasmine Johnson, 9 years old. Patrick Dempsey, 59 years old, and Tallulah Fife Dempsey, 23 years old. Jason Bateman, 56 years old, and Maple Bateman, 13 years old. Kelsey Grammer, 70 years old, and Greer Grammer, 33 years old. Tyrese Gibson, 46 years old, and Shayla Summer Gibson, 18 years old. Lenny Kravitz, 61 years old, and Zoe Kravitz, 36 years old. Ethan Hawke, 54 years old, and Maya Hawke, 27 years old. Lawrence Fishburne, 64 years old, and Montana Fishburne, 33 years old. Judd Apatow, 57 years old, and Maud Apatow, 27 years old. Chris Rock, 60 years old, and Lola Simone Rock, 23 years old. Channing Tatum, 45 years old, and Everly Tatum, 12 years old. Stellan Skarsgård, 74 years old, and Aja Skarsgård, 33 years old. Peter Dinklage, 56 years old, and Zelig Dinklage, 13 years old. Jason Momoa, 46 years old, and Lola Lolani Momoa, 18 years old. Steve Carell, 63 years old, and Elizabeth Ann Carell, 24 years old. Dean McDermott, 58 years old, and Stella Doreen McDermott, 17 years old. Will Smith, 56 years old, and Willow Smith, 24 years old. Steve Irwin passed away in 2006, at the age of 44, and Bindi Irwin, 27 years old. David Beckham, 50 years old, and Harper Beckham, 13 years old. Tim McGraw, 58 years old, and Gracie McGraw, 28 years old. Jamie Dornan, 43 years old, and Dulcie Dornan, 11 years old. James Brolin, 85 years old, and Molly Elizabeth Brolin, 38 years old. Joel Madden, 46 years old, and Harlow Madden, 17 years old.